Hey, welcome back to That 70s Card Show. My name is John Keating, and I thank you for joining me as I take a look back at the cards and the culture of the very colorful 1970s. We'll revisit a more simple time in our hobby by taking a deep dive into the sets and the stats with a generous amount of dad facts sprinkled in. That 70s Card Show is currently sponsored by nobody. If you have a comment or suggestion, drop me a line at that70scardshow@gmail.com. 70s Card on Twitter, or That 70s Card Show on YouTube. This is episode 79. It's the last of a series of talks with collectors regarding the wonderful 1970s. And what better way to cap it off with the guy that was there, boots on the ground, 1979, Dr. James Beckett. How are you, Dr. Jim?
Great. A lot of times on my podcast, the first thing people say is how honored they are to be on the podcast. I can say this for you. I am really honored to be on your podcast and to be episode 79.
79. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, I'm gonna call you out on something. When you way back when you said, "How long can you go with the '70s?" And I have a feeling that you've kind of come around to how much fun the '70s were in the hobby and in baseball as well. So hopefully you've embraced it a little bit more. It was kind of a dull decade, but there was some personality there, that's for sure.
Well, you persevered and you've kind of won me over. I'm realizing that the 70s were my favorite decade of collecting of all the decades for my personal experience of collecting. It was my greatest and most favorite, but not for the reasons that we'll discuss later in this.
So, yeah, so 79, right? I've spoken to you about this on your show, on my show. You were on episode 21 here. You're the math guy. You do the math on how many episodes ago that was. 79 was a big year for me personally, and a huge year for you professionally, I guess, right? So we're not going to dwell on 1979 in cards, but we're going to talk about the hobby a little bit. Tell me about 1979, going into 1979 where you were, and coming out of 1979 where you were.
Going into 79, 78, I actually announced my first price survey in 76, did it in 77, 78. And then by 79, it was, I don't know that it was time, but I just felt I should do a price guide, an annual, more comprehensive book. And I did it with Denny Eckes, who was a well established dealer slash distributor on the East Coast and a great guy. And so in the spring of 79, that book came out. So 78 was the last half of 78 was a blur because all I was doing was working. All my free time was going toward working on. I was still going to shows, a very active dealer, but I was really working the price guide. A lot of late nights to try to get it from what was out there to some format that people could use. So then when it came out, it was an immediate success and very very blessed in that way. But I didn't realize I had just gotten on a roller coaster that had some highs and some lows. Did a couple other books that year in 79, and I probably didn't realize what I was getting into in 79. I'm glad I did, but it was an awful lot of work, and it really set me on a trajectory. So you're right, 79 was pivotal.
So obviously, you talk about the preparation for that first book. That was strictly in your mind that had to be a labor of love because there was nothing in the publication end of things where people were making a living
Nobody
doing this in our hobby, right?
wasn't thinking that it just needed to be done, and I thought I was the guy to do it, and it was a labor of love, and
So
it was fun. It was like a math puzzle,
right,
trying to
exactly.
trying to put it all together, synthesize all this information. I thought I can do this, and it'll be a contribution. I didn't have any thought that I would make money or that I would do it every year. I was a professor. I'd gotten tenure that year, so I didn't really have to do anything, but I loved it. I really did love it.
Two questions. Well, a couple more. Did you ever go streaking in the '70s at the college campuses, or were
No,
you?
no, I did
No,
not.
that never happened. Okay. Secondly, did you realize when you were working on the first one, I'm not talking about a publishing empire, but I'm talking about, did you realize that it was kind of it would be a never ending process? It's not a book that comes out once and that's it. Did you realize it was an open ended situation, this book?
Uh, I realized it, but not in the way you're saying. I mean, basically, as soon as I got done with that book, I kind of got working on the football price guide.
Okay.
And so in that sense, I thought, this really there's some legs to this. I wasn't thinking about the annual frequency, but it became when it sold so well. And the other thing it did that suggested that wasn't known in advance is that prices start going up. As soon as you had a price guide, then you had a baseline, and so a
Reference.
bunch of things. And people weren't criticizing the book when it came out because I think it was very accurate for when it was out. But then a few months later, with everybody knowing here's what it's worth, and they want to pay more or less or whatever, and so there was a lot more price movement. And so by the following year, it was time to do it again. And I don't know that I started immediately, but because I immediately worked on football, but then probably in the fall, I started thinking, sending out some more surveys and figuring out I'm going to do this again. And it was fun and it was
Right.
well received, a lot of good feedback. And there were legitimate changes in price movements that made it not a gratuitous second edition, but we added sets from your beloved 70s
Right.
as well as just older, newer, whatever sets that came out and refreshed all the prices. So it
Can you
was fresh work.
can you tell me for the record where that price guide was launched?
Where was
Where did you sell it for the first time?
the Philly show,
All right, right on,
which
man.
was Fort Washington, I think, at
Fort
that,
Washington, probably. Yeah.
or the was that Willow Grove? Where
Willow Grove, same. Yeah, it was Willow Grove, which is the next second,
Willow Grove?
exit down. And GW Lodge, right?
At the GW Lodge, yeah.
Right.
And I
And you
didn't have
sold out, right?
it sold 5,000 copies the first day.
So what was the
All,
price?
all we brought
What was the price?
five or
Four ninety five.
$6 maybe.
Yeah, okay. I got it at the bookstore, Gene's Books in King of Prussia, and really, I couldn't wait to take a pen to that thing and just start filling out the 3 or 4 cards I had from the 74 set, the 20 beaters I had from the 75 set. So,
Uh,
yeah. Whose idea was that? The little box. I guess you took it right from Tops or
Denny. That was
okay.
Denny
Alright.
had already had a copyright for Sport Americana and
Okay.
had done a checklist book, and so he really thought, and that was kind of partly his contribution to it, that he had some kind of common law, which I don't know that but he'd done that, and he had a distribution network for that, and so I did all the pricing and all that stuff. So that was something that we put together. I think later that was dropped just because of real estate
Right.
considerations, but that was a nice touch, I think.
Any uncorrected errors in that first edition?
Uh, we actually had a second edition. The white cover was the first edition. The brown cover where we
Yeah, I had the
got
brown
a Japanese
cover. Yeah.
publisher, but I think it was just kind of, I don't know that anything was changed.
Okay. Right. So, you that's how you exited the 70s. We're gonna talk about when I reached out to I was 10 for 10, by the way, and people that I wanted to talk to about the 70s, and thankfully, I was able to convince you to talk to something that you, wanted to talk about. So we're gonna talk a little bit about TCMA here, right?
That's would I have made you 9 out of 10 instead of 10 out of a 10? That would have been terrible. You could have had a pinch hitter for me, but it was more enticing as I thought about this that I do have some perspective, and it's not so much about any one set, which is the way you seemingly approached me in the beginning. It's just the 70s were a great decade, and there were some great sets there, uh, and I think the TCMA sets. That was my point. I think they've been underappreciated, not
Right,
just financially underappreciated, but just because aesthetically they're not great.
right.
Aesthetically great. The paper stock is not great. So by today's standards, but they were a real contribution. They were absolutely a real contribution.
Yeah, there's, there was Fleer in the 70s, there was Don Russ in the 70s, there was Exograph in the 70s. All these players were around in the 70s. Everything didn't break it. All hell didn't break loose until 1981. But I look at TCMA as, I always thought Fleer was the agitator with the lawsuits, but it seems like TCMA was the one that was poking the bear the most. And I don't know whether that was their intention or not, but it's, why don't you tell me
I don't think that was I don't think they were poking the bear. I think they were trying to fly low under the radar. I mean, they were
initially, right? But I mean,
initially, but with the SSPC set, that yeah, and even that wasn't. It's just, Tops had a near monopoly, and Tops was synonymous with cards in the 70s. Even all these other brands you're talking about, they were Tops had 90% market share.
right,
And so I don't even know that they thought TCMA was a nuisance or a competitor, but they were putting out sets that Tops wouldn't have otherwise done, that were old timers. But when they started doing new players, that would be interesting. And the fact that it was only done 1 year, it's
right.
probably some cease and desist.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that real quick. SSPC 75, 76. We know it to be 76, but 75 gets attached to it. It seems like they put out a full set, full color. It was kind of a wonderful thing for them, considering every card was taken. The pictures were taken at Shea Stadium, so a stroke of luck there. They only had to be in one place, one stadium. They didn't have to run around even over to Yankee Stadium, right? Because the Yankees were playing in Shea in 75 and 74. Uh, that wasn't licensed by the players, or obviously it wasn't licensed by the league, was it? Neither one of these were licensed. These were licensed by neither entity, were they?
I don't think so. I mean, again, we didn't regard it as a full rookie card kind of a set back in the day, to the extent rookie cards were considered. It was like a collector set. It was like a collector set that was just happened to be very large and
Yeah,
comprehensive.
yeah, but it's interesting considering how the late '60s there was kind of a little baseball card war that had broken out between the players' union and the league, right? Or between the players' union and Tops or whatever. And it's crazy how this thing got out there to begin with. The players or the league were not involved in any kind of lawsuits, from what I gather from with TCMA, but Tops did engage them. With a cease and desist, as you say, and it was pretty much of a sweetheart deal, wouldn't you say? Like sell out your inventory and just don't do it again, that kind of thing. Slap on the wrist.
Probably, but I mean, it's I in the overall scheme of things, I don't think it was that huge,
Hmm.
in terms of what they printed. On the other hand, there's been this dance in the legal arena of these copyright. I won't say infringers, but when you're in the gray area, the Tops, I don't think, wanted to get a ruling, or run the risk of getting a ruling that would be more expansive or more inclusive, in a way that said, hey, what they're doing is okay up to this point.
Right.
Instead, they could just threaten them as the big person and say, hey, sell it out and don't do it anymore, and keep making your minor league sets.
Yeah, let's talk about the first time you became aware of TCMA. I mean, did you know about the players before? It was a small community, obviously, the collecting community. Do you know about the uh, the players involved in making these sets prior to the sets coming out, or did when did you find out about TCMA as a whole for the first time?
Well, I didn't meet Tom Collier and Mike Aronstein until probably 75.
Okay.
I was in Texas, but when I moved up to Ohio and started hitting the New York shows, and I guess Collier, I think, was in Maryland, but I mean the East Coast, I did shows in, up and down the East Coast and in the Midwest. So I met those guys, and the sets were way more prevalent in their areas. I didn't see much in Texas. Again, in 73, 74, 75, but by 75, yeah, they were, again, they look different. They
Right.
didn't look different better, but they look different for somebody that wanted to have everything, which I did.
Yeah, they were all mail order full sets, right? And which is one of the ways Mike Arenstein has said he was trying to get around the whole tops thing, not
If
pack
he'd put,
distributed,
because if, as you remember, the part of the lawsuit with Fleer uh, had to do with confectionery.
right?
That they had some rights to that, and so then there was. But as soon as that gets clarified, then there's a workaround, and so I
Right.
don't think they wanted that with. And I don't think Mike, I think, was the prime mover there. Mike Arenstein. I don't think he wanted to poke the bear. I think he wanted to fly under the radar, and so the attempt to just make these collector sets with old photography and then do minor leagues. That's classic disruptive uh, strategy. You do things that aren't being done.
Right. Well, disruptive to me equates to being an agitator. Maybe I just
Well,
in,
the sometimes disruptive technology is stealth. You're coming in to do, and there are books written about this. That you come in and the major competitor is dismissive because I don't really want to do that anyway. But as you build your base of business, kind of on the stealth, all of a sudden now you're a legitimate competitor because you have customers who think you're okay, and
okay.
and an alternative.
So let's talk about Collectors Quarterly. Did you subscribe to this magazine?
Uh, how I have those, but I can't. I didn't subscribe right at the beginning. What's the first year of that?
Oh man, I don't know. You're going to ask me that, huh?
I think
Uh,
it's earlier 70s.
earlier 70s, but this was their primary form of advertising for the sets, right? For the TCMA set.
I had those, but I think I got them at a later date for many of them.
Okay. So you're saying to me down in Tejas, the TCMA kind of, even though you can get these through the U.S. mail, TCMA wasn't kind of their presence was kind of diluted down there, or they weren't very prominent down there.
You had to find out about it. And if you, one of the sporting news had classified ads in the
Right.
back where you could get cards in the early 70s. There were, it just, and there weren't many shows. There weren't many, there were almost no card stores. So no local card shops, but
So people weren't ordering 20 of these at a time from Sporting News or Collectors Quarterly and then taking them to shows.
people were, but not in Texas that much. I mean,
Okay.
and even if there were, they weren't considered, they weren't illegitimate, but they were less legitimate. People really were focused on older cards. And again, my experience is we're talking about the 70s here. In the 70s, especially early 70s, it could have been on somebody's table, but it would have been overlooked. Other
Right.
than other than curiosity, people wanted to complete their flagship top sets. They wanted to work backwards. You could tell what level of collector was by somebody, by what they were looking for. And I don't recall people looking that much for oddball stuff.
So prior to 1972, which I believe the Cedar Rapids Cardinals was their first minor league set, was there any interest in minor league cards? The only thing I could think of is PCL stuff back in the 20s. Was there anything between
PCL was
PC?
a big deal. No, that you were a legitimate collector if you had Z Nuts
Right.
and Obacs and things that were from the PCL. The PCL was a pretty close to major league level back in
DiMaggio, Williams, all those guys,
30s, yeah.
right?
And so it was a respected minor league, and it was West Coast, so it
Mhm.
was different. And so
Yeah, but this is the first set we see, right? Between maybe since the 20s, I guess, up until 1972, we don't
well, no,
see
there were
many
other
minor.
minor league sets, but not. But it was there was no pattern. It would
Okay.
just be an occasional thing, and they're really tough. If
Right.
I looking back in my old price guides, I'm not up on it as much, but there were just there were they're just really tough. They're just really tough. Anything pre TCMA that was in that space of the 40s or 50s, like you said, mostly it's PCL, but there were others.
It's a stroke of luck here that right from the horse's mouth, Mike Aaronstein received a letter or a call from a collector who was a minor league involved in, I guess, Cedar Rapids Cardinals, and he asked him to print some cards up, and it was I think a 50-50 proposition. Here's 1,000 for you. Here's 1,000 for me. And, it makes you wonder, without that call, um, would the rest of the TCMA legacy be built uh, on the same foundation? Because it's pretty, like many things in life, it's kind of a stroke of luck there, right? Somebody reaching out saying, "Can you print these things up?" Doesn't sound like it was his idea. It sounds like it was somebody from the Cedar Rapids Cardinals.
Well, he had already been doing these old timers kind of things. And in most cases, and I think he had some photographic kind of understanding or ability. So I think he was a pretty savvy guy in a lot of ways. But all of his sets before that Cedar Rapids were taking existing art.
Right.
Whereas Cedar Rapids, you got to hire a photographer, go out there, take reasonable pictures, which aren't so great in some cases, of each, and make sure you know who in all the sets that he had done before were recognizable, uh, kind of recognizable players for purists, players that actually played in the big leagues. Cedar Rapids, some of those players, I mean, it's just a, any rate. So there was a lot more work involved. But if somebody said, "Hey, I'm going to go halvesies with you and make sure so and the rest is history, right?" And it's just amazing how little things like that make a difference. And then his minor league sets got better and better and better, but they never, like I said, they never got up to the level where you'd say, "Hey, I'm confusing this with a Topps card."
Right. Well, the fronts were, at least for the major league products that they would do, whether it was the '60s, the '50s, whatever. There wasn't a lot. It was just the photography on the front, which I think he owned a big photo dump of. Or when I say he, I keep talking about the MA part of it. But there was a big photo dump which enabled TCMA to pop out these old sets, right? These old timers from the '30s, '40s, '50s, '60s. I think he still has that business
Right.
running.
But some of them are photos of photos. I mean, they're not necessarily always dealing with the negatives.
Right.
They're a photo of a photo, so the quality can be very grainy and cross hatching and things like that. So again, I think they were just taking photos or whatever they had, and and yet in the TCMA minor league sets, they weren't all pure cards, but they had minimal graphic design elements. And
Right.
so it was more minimalist. Like I said, they weren't going to win any awards for design, but they were a classic card with the picture of the person and then kind of a name and a team or something, which is the kind of the basics of most of the sets.
I'm going to pop this up on the screen. This is Ricky Henderson, and he's with the Ogden A's. And you talk about minimalistic. It is minimalistic,
Yeah.
right? No stats on the back. Brief, body stuff. Bats left, throws right, all that fun stuff. Seems like there's more advertising on the back than there is relevant information to the player. But this is stuff in real time. We're real time. We're a real time hobby right now, right? Rookies, all that fun stuff. This is something that nobody knew about, this Ricky Henderson card, or the relevance of this Ricky Henderson card, for many years after it was released in, what was it, '79, I guess?
79. Yeah.
Yeah. So these sets you're still setting up in the shows in the late '70s. Are any of these on your table, or you just have all the true vintage stuff, '60s, '50s, and beyond, right? I mean, nobody's caring about this stuff at the shows.
Well, no, there'd be there if you went to a huge show, there'd be somebody that had them, but they weren't doing blockbuster business. I mean,
Right.
it would be, it's like Denny, my kind of a publishing close friend who had this distribution business. He had all the minor league sets, and he put them on his table. He sold plastic sheets, so it was stuff that you could easily replenish. He
Okay.
was tight with Mike Aaronstein, and he'd be one of the distributors, and so that was, so you never saw just one set. This was another marketing, not a blunder, but if you could walk up to a table and you don't and you only have one table out of 100 at the show, but they have 10 of every set. It doesn't make you think, hey, I better get this now because it's really going up in value.
Right.
It's just, and nobody was cherry picking the Ripkins or the Hendersons or anything like that. It just looked like, well, those are just homemade sets. They're a step above that, but not fully respected.
Do you think it was more of a regional thing? Like, I can't imagine Ryan Sandberg's card having any interest, Reading Phillies card at the time, any interest beyond anybody in the Philadelphia area, or
I
you know,
think again, what you said for the Cedar Rapids, I think the concept probably was pretty similar for all those sets. That if just being a math guy, I think probably half the sets that they produced, which could have been 1 or 2 thousand sets for a lot of the 1 or 2 thousand total sets, I think half of them stayed in the geographic area.
right?
Market either on a card night for the team or for the team to I think that was so I don't know that it was paying for rights as much as half the sets went there, and the other half could have gone anywhere. And like I said, they went to distributors or in their various publications to sell them one at a time. But they were only going for a few bucks.
It's crazy, huh? So I'm a big fan of the older the sets that depict the older stuff. I have no interest really in the minor league sets. There's players out there that people love, Hall of Famers, but the 50s, the 60s, I have those sets and I appreciate them now. And I think that now there's an appreciation that there wasn't in previous decades, I would say, right? Because people like myself have really come to embrace these things over the last couple of years. Am I behind the curve or am I with the curve on that? It seems like there's more of an appreciation now, or has that been happening for a while?
You mean for the '70s or for the
For the TCMA sets,
I
what
think
the
they're still not
60s sets and the
fully
50 sets.
appreciated. I mean, if Rich Klein or many people have a 20, 25, 30-year rule that things come in vogue as the when you come back and reflect on your childhood as somebody with disposable income. But it's like the window's closed for TCMA, and they never really went up. Notable exceptions for a few enduring superstars that where there's a chase for that. But for the run of the mill average non-star player from TCMA, if you wanted to corner the market for somebody's cards, you'd have trouble because they're just not that many out there. And so the scarcity, the supply and demand, there's just not enough demand other than for the big stars. But if there ever were to be bigger demand, there's not enough to go around, and the price could go way up.
You know what? One of the difficult things with this set is the fact that it wasn't pack distributed and it was distributed in a set form with a finite amount of sets. Is that if you have an incomplete set, it can be difficult to complete the set. You're not going to do it at a card show. You're not going to go to the card show with a list of 50 TCMA, the 50s or 60s, or even the SSPC and knock it off your list.
Well, actually, you're right, but the other insidious part of me being the price guide guy is that there are a lot of short sets that are sold in some of those TCMA where there's some late editions, and you've got to be sure that when you buy the set, you're buying the complete set that has the last two cards that were added to the set, at the end of the year. And
You talking
so,
about the team cards there? Because I know you and
oh
Rich kind
no,
of talked about that, the little 5x7s.
no, I'm talking about, in the late '70s, there, in '77, '78, '79, there are occasionally some players that were traded and removed,
Okay.
or they were traded in and added to the set because the team wanted the full representation. Therefore, you couldn't. It was really difficult. My point is, it's really difficult to buy that just one card, and so again, not fitting with your theme of your show, but I did not collect TCMA cards. I collected TCMA sets. I'm trying to think of any card from the 70s that I collected that I didn't collect as a set. There were I just bought sets. I bought collections and I bought sets. And in fact, I didn't really buy collections of 70s cards. I bought collections that had 70s cards in there. No offense, you had to take it all. And there now was some really good stuff in there. I'm glad I did.
Right.
But the perception in the 70s is that no sets in the 70s are a challenge. No cards. There could be a few individual cards, but it was like, if I want it, I can just buy it.
Right.
Which was true to some extent in the 60s, but not true at all in the 50s. Even if you had a lot of money in the 50s and you wanted to get all the cards, you really couldn't.
Right.
Because things were really scarce and people just wouldn't let them go. 60s, not very many. 70s, there weren't huge cards in the 70s that people, comparatively. I
Right.
mean, Walter Payton, is a great card now.
Gretzky.
And Gretzky, those
Right.
are huge cards.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you're just checking you in real time. You're absolutely right. I looked before the show, and if you look at Beckett OPG, it says the most perceived highest value cards are the things you talk about, late issues like the Shreveport Captains from the 76 set and various add-ons and bolt-ons. It's one of those rare things where you don't find any Mickey Mantles or whatever in there. You see what you see is as you say, the rare late editions, the 16B Stu Greenstein or the 4B Butch Bentons, people that are lost in history, but
there's not a B on it. So basically, if you if you were looking through a dollar box and you found it wouldn't say it's a variation, but it would be. And if Rich Klein would recognize it, I would probably recognize it, but that's not really what we're looking for. But when you see an unusual card there, it could be the scarce variation. And but again, nobody's put. I just don't go through binders to see. My TCMA sets are all like set bags, and that's. But if I have literally all the TCMA sets,
all the minor league,
all the minor,
nice little 30 pack team bag, right?
The team bag's great, right. But you can't really show them to people. And I've got boxes and boxes and boxes. I didn't even know that you can even sell them.
Yeah, I got you.
So I don't know what I'm going to do when I have a fabulous minor league collection, and I'm not advertising to sell them on your show.
Right.
But when I die, somebody's going to get them, and I hope somebody would take the whole thing,
right?
And not because there's a few of them in there that are a lot more valuable than the others, but a lot of them are $5, $10 sets.
Right.
But
I still see them.
You can't get $5 or $10 if you try to sell them in bulk.
Yeah. So you and Rich talked a little while back on your show about TCMA, and you'd mentioned that they had finally, or Rich mentioned that they had finally gotten a license. I think he was off by about 10 years because 2017, there's a set listed that has, I guess it's a serial number to 500. So they went from, according to Beckett OPG, 1989 Albuquerque Dukes was a set, and that was set 646, and then 647 was the 2017 TCMA. It makes you wonder what makes a company go almost 30 years between sets and then try to finally get that licensing. Seems it would have been easier to get the licensing in the 90s than the 2017s.
Well, it got more and more crowded, and so I think it squeezes the profit margins. And some of the pro cards of the world and the line drive or whatever these other things, they were, again, if you're going to be a disruptor, you want to be the lone disruptor.
Right. Yeah. Classic was in there, right? Classic.
You don't want to be competing with other disruptors that not that it's a race to the bottom, but so you withdraw and move on to something else.
Yeah, I think that's when they focused on the photo file thing. Seems to be less aggravation and maybe more higher return on their investment at that point. What else do you have to say about these bad boys? Anything? You
see.
got some putting the glasses on.
Okay.
He's gonna read me the riot act here.
Okay. Here's a point for your consideration. I believe the 70s are underrepresented on my card wall.
Okay.
I'm not making a symbolic apology to you about that, but I'm just thinking, you know, a lot of people really care about the 70s. That's why your podcast resonates. There's a certain something, and like I said, it was my favorite decade to collect. Not so much about the cards as much as where I was in my life, and the cards were fine, and they weren't. It's like we now look back and say that the late 80s, early 90s were kind of like junk wax. And we didn't think the 70s were junk wax in the 70s, but they were just the omnipresent cards that you could always get. And so there wasn't a historical perspective of this year's cards, other than the fact that this year was better than last year. And my horrible story is that in 73, when I was kind of jumping back into the hobby, and I had a buddy, and he said, I'm thinking about getting either a 72 top set or a 73 top set through mail order with something like Sporting News or something like that. The 73s are just out. The 72s, that's last year's, but they're both $15. What do
Wow.
you think? Do you want to go in halvesies? You don't want to split? And I thought, what kind of a chump was I that I couldn't come up with $15 to buy my own set of
Right.
73 or 72. Now it's worse because we decided to buy the 73 set instead of the 72
Unreal.
set. Again, because of that bias that was this year's cards and that would be more meaningful instead of thinking the 72 top set, which is my favorite 70s top set by far.
Right.
And the one that is really, I think, one really tricky to put together card by card. I later didn't buy it. I didn't put it together card by card. I bought it, and again for a lot less money, but not $15.
Right.
And the 73 set is long gone. I actually, when the when the set came in the mail, my buddy that I no longer know, that was just a kind of instant friend, that said, "Hey, let's just do that. Let's check it out." When the set came, he reneged.
Oh man.
And he said, "I'm sorry. I just my wife is not going to let me spend this money. You're going to have to take me out of my half of the set."
You're talking about $7.50.
I'm talking about $7. Now this is late '73,
Okay.
and I'm a struggling grad student working a few jobs with in a fellowship and studying and having a good time too, and doing card stuff. But 750. I I don't know if I wrote him a check
Crazy.
or searched in my wallet, but let's see.
It sounds like you're buying a block of 50 sets for $15 a pop, and that may be a decision you have to make. But for one set at
I'm
$15,
saying, uh,
fractional set.
let's see.
You're saying your wall. You said something about your wall.
Yeah. I think I'm underrepresented. I think people would appreciate more of the 70 sets. The 70 sets I have on the wall are basically some notable rookies of the decade, Eckersley, Fisk, things like that, but also some I may have that Henderson, so there's some TCMA cards that are on there. I want to put things that people haven't haven't otherwise seen.
What about 1975 tops number 407? Is that under consideration?
No, which one? 1952 tops?
1975 tops number 407.
Is that Herb Washington?
It is Herb Washington.
Yeah. Well,
Or even a mini. Why not a mini of Herb?
well, I'm not sure that's going to make the grade, but I'm trying to have a wall that every card has a story that appeals to more than one person.
That's a legendary card. I'm not the only one. You
Okay.
know,
Okay. I will mark.
and the mini, like I said, I don't know if you have any of the minis on there, but the minis play a part in our fascinating role in our hobby's history.
Okay. One other story about the TCMA is that, and I don't know that it was 1980, but it was again in '79, which is your focus here. There was no national convention, but it was being talked about. And so in the 1980 price guide that we did, we had an, let's see, yeah, that would be the 1980 price guide that came out in the spring. We had an ad on the back cover or whatever, inside back cover perhaps, for the national convention that was going to be in LA in maybe at that, it may have been Labor Day, but it was maybe late August, early September. And so that was in the second price guide. But also in the second price guide, I think this is when it kicked in. Denny and I started getting a little more aggressive, especially him. This was his area of taking out ads. And so we would do ads, and we had a guy that wanted to take out ads, and he didn't have any money, but he had minor league sets because he was a big distributor of minor league sets. And so he told Denny, he said, I can't give the money, but I can give you in trade. And so Denny called me. He said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, what do we want with these minor league sets?" And he said, "Well, I can sell them. I have a catalog, and I do a lot of mail order, and I set up at shows, and but we can get them for $1 a piece, and I sell them for $5. So why don't we do the deal?" I said, "Well, are you going to send me half, or share the profits?" Well, he was smart. He wasn't going to share the profits of that,
Right.
because that'd be separate bookkeeping and all that stuff. He said, "Well, I'll just send you half the sets." So that was
That's
hundreds
how
of
you
sets.
got
That was
your
hundreds
sets.
of sets, yeah.
Right.
And apparently we did that more than 1 year.
Hundreds of unique sets, or you're talking
No,
about
there were, there was. Now I wish he would have done lots of multiples
right.
of the
Right.
79s, but it was probably
Okay.
five
Right.
of every team, and so you got 5 bad ones, but 5 good ones, but most of them weren't great. But,
Right.
so that got me started. And again, the other point I was going to make in the 70s, I had no thought of being a cataloger. I just wanted to have a great collection. I wasn't thinking like when Rich and I in the 90s and 2000s and 2000 especially, we're looking for type cards so we could broaden the reach of the catalog, and so I was always trying to get stuff and get the checklist and all that stuff. No thought of that in the 70s. I just wanted to have a great collection, and a great collection was not evaluated by how many TCMA sets you had,
Right.
or frankly, John, how many sets you had from the 70s.
Right.
It was mostly what region, because I by the mid 70s I had all the Tops, all the Bowman, all the play balls, all the Gaudies. And that was the entry point for being a serious collector. Because
Right.
after that, that was assumed. And then it was, how many of these regionals do you have? How many rodeo meats and dandy potato chips and Glendale meats and
Mhm.
Sugardales and Stallmeyers and things like
Cons, all
that,
that stuff. Yeah.
and cons. And if you didn't have that, then I mean that's really what your credibility was.
Right.
And so, but then as I started doing the books and I realized there's an opportunity here, like you said, the legs for the initial price guide were to do more price guides, keep updating, keep adding. And so then in the 80s, I got very aggressive about adding sets that I didn't have. I didn't buy the set if it was real expensive. I just would buy a type card. But you
Right.
couldn't buy a type card of the TCMA cards. And
Exactly.
so that's cool. So I have the sets, but I didn't need to buy more than one. But I had all these duplicates from that original deal, and maybe did that more than 1 year. So I
Right.
have a whole bunch of them. And so I could trade or sell those and get other ones. But mainly it was buying, kind of keeping up with what was coming out that was new. And so that made the 80s not as much fun for me. It was fun in a different way. I was acquiring stuff, but it was almost like I was acquiring it like I was an archivist.
Right.
Like I was acquiring it for a library.
Right.
Whereas in the 70s, I was a collector slash dealer. I mean, I wasn't trying to make money. I was trying to, so my sales, I mean, I probably went home with a little bit more money at every card show than I came with, but I came back with more cards too. I had better cards and a little bit more money, but the emphasis on better cards. I was trading, buying and selling. and the TCMA wasn't part of that. And by 1980, I was no longer doing any card shows and
Right.
no longer really selling cards. I realized that I partnered with Gervis Ford and Wayne Grove in the First Base, the store in Dallas that Brian Gray used to haunt. Uh, and haunt is probably the right word. He had a sharp eye even then, and so that was a way for me to put my duplicates in there. Um,
Self-sustaining hobby, right? We still talk about that.
yeah,
It's a
that's a good thing. That's a good
yeah,
thing. But the TCMAs were not really self-sustaining. It just wasn't enough volume.
right.
The real action was in the tops. That's why tops was the main thing, all through the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Do you think that the Max Wax era, late '80s, when we started chasing, we meaning everybody else but me, started chasing rookies? Do you think that had a huge impact on the TCMA minor sets? Because we still argue about McGuire. Ruben Sierra was a big deal in 1987, all that stuff. But back in the '70s, we didn't chase the rookies that much.
Well, back in the 80s, and when rookie cards really got really rolling and very, very hot, it's amazing. It only elevated a few. I mean, the Henderson is a good card.
Fernando was a big one in real time.
Yeah, but his
Right.
minor league card, no one
Right.
is. Again, when Victor gets into this and talks about the definition of a rookie card and how it's evolved, minor league cards were never in the discussion.
Right.
Even though they're great cards, they're pre-rookie cards. The DiMaggio Z Nuts,
Right.
I've got that card. That's a great card, but nobody's saying that's his rookie card. But they're just saying it's a great card. So it doesn't have to be a rookie card to be a great card. Henderson, Ripken, the Ripken Charlotte card, the orange and the blue one. I mean, those things are way rarer and and harder to
Right.
find and actually more expensive than his tops and Donnerson Fleer rookie cards. So yeah, but so I would have thought that when the rookie card craze really caught fire, it would have elevated more of the minor league scene,
Hmm.
and it only selectively did in a muted way.
Okay.
And so even now, if there's ever a run on any card that's a TCMA card, it's not that you can corner the market, but there are just not that many out there. And so if demand increased, then there's not enough supply to go around. It-
I may be the only person left in the world that doesn't know the answer to this question, but why is the 1933 Gaudi set considered everybody's rookie card?
Well, the problem is there was a real gap there in in terms of nationally distributed, pack pulled major sets. That would be, and so you had almost a 15-year lag, of those kind of sets. And so that meant in 33, that was the first card that was pack pulled, nationally distributed, and well established. I mean, you couldn't, it's fact, almost you had to be a major set. You had to be a major producer. That's why the Leaf cards, now we're arguing what is Jackie's rookie,
Right.
and really back in the day, I think the Leaf cards were not really considered rookie cards because it was a minor, poor quality set from 48, 49.
Right.
Football and baseball and boxing were all not good quality, and so it's not that they weren't legitimate cards; they just weren't esteemed equal to 48 or 49 Bowmans, which also were not great aesthetic cards,
Hmm.
but were part of a. You had to be a major producer. You had to be a tops. I mean, rookie cards were tops, Bowman, pack pulled, nationally distributed, not put in a box, the randomness aspect. And so, I mean, I went through that and so the gap between Gaudi and any predecessor set would have been a caramel card or a tobacco card. I mean, Gaudi is the beginning of of the gum era of cards, as Jefferson Burdick declared.
Yeah, I mean, what fascinates me is, you have guys in there that were in the T206 sets, I imagine. Maybe I'm wrong, but you have guys like Eddie Collins and stuff like that whose rookie cards in 1933,
Well, no,
right?
well, two things.
Lajoie, right?
Okay, it's like an eBay RC. I'm not saying those things are rookie cards, even if they were in some sense rookie cards. When it's so far down in the guy's career that he's an old timer,
Right, right,
it's like a 48 leaf Wagner.
right,
Is that a rookie card? Well, or his play ball card. He's got a play ball card. Well, no, he's like a coach.
right.
And so if you're a minor Hall of Famer, or if you're well into your career or retired, even if it is technically in some sense a rookie card, which I think it's not, it just doesn't have a lot of extra value. And so the Eddie Collins, who actually was a great player,
Yep,
he was way past his prime. And
right.
so I wouldn't think, yeah, there's other Eddie Collins cards.
Yeah, I don't know where that RC came from in the 33
Well, I mean,
Gaudy, whether that was,
the
um,
caramel cards were not really considered back in the day. People weren't thinking caramel cards were rookie cards.
right,
Or the Lou Gehrig exhibit card in 25 is now considered as rookie. That's a very rare exception of an oversized an exhibit card, because otherwise there's a lot of exhibit cards that could be technically rookie cards. The exhibit
yeah,
cards, especially when you get to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you don't even know what year they came out, and so that'd be another. I hate to egg on Victor, but when you pick up a card and you don't know what year it came out,
I
it
know.
doesn't seem fair that it'd be a rookie card, because there's too much subjectivity to it. You need to look on the back and see the statistics or the lack of statistics because he's a rookie. But in those days, it was almost he'd always it'd be ridiculous to get a card before you'd been in the game. Whether it was a minor league or major league, you got a card because you were a player, not
Right.
because you were a prospect.
Yeah.
You were
Yeah,
on you were on
it
the team.
I'm an advocate of the first card because, like you say, rookie cards for Eddie Collins was in 1909 Ramley. He was in the American Caramel, Philadelphia Caramel, T206, and then here we are calling him a rookie in 1933, right?
I would. Who's calling him a rookie? Like I said,
Let's see here.
is there any
I
databases?
don't know how to pronounce this, but it says Beckett.
You're kidding me.
No.
What publication would that be?
Beckett OPG. It's right there.
That's sad.
Yeah. I didn't know whether that was something that was
Well,
it
that
goes
must be.
back to Jefferson Burdick, whether it's
Oh, no, no, no. That
yeah,
must be an artifact of a algorithmic
right.
declaration. That
Yeah, the 33 Gaudy has
it's his
all
first gum card. It's his first gum.
yeah, first gum
I,
cards. Yeah.
I wouldn't call that and first nationally distributed in a pack.
Yeah.
Again, none of those other cards, they were in a candy pack or a cigarette pack, I guess.
Right.
They weren't in a wax pack.
Yeah, 238 out of the 240 cards in the 33 Gaudy are considered rookie cards by
Okay,
the Beckett OPG. So you might want to make a call.
let me just say I'm not in charge, and if I were in charge,
I know, I
that
know.
sounds like an algorithmic addition of something that's just determined by the computer. If there's nothing before it that's of a certain kind of set, I guess. But I don't agree with that.
Okay, good.
But it doesn't. It like my point is, it doesn't really affect the value that much. It's not
Right. Yeah,
extra
exactly. You're right.
value.
33 Gaudies are worth what they're worth
Worth
because they're
what they're
33
worth.
Gaudies. Yeah.
But then you have these set registries and Mike Payne 300 kind of things, where if people go after something, where like the rookie cards of all the Hall of
Yep.
Famers, it ought to be I agree with you, first card.
Right. Right. Well, it was kind of the Wild West back then, kind of like with TCMA. There was a lot going on. The TCMA was throwing a lot out there, especially in the 70s. There was
Yeah, but in the
Dozens, if
'70s,
not
there was
hundreds of sets. Yeah.
very, very minor consideration of rookie cards in the '70s. It really
Yep.
crescendoed in the '80s.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, I mean, I don't think people were even thinking the Goudies. Again, the Goudies. It wasn't about whether there were rookie cards in there. It was about completing the set.
Right.
And there's tons of Hall of Famers in there, but even there, one of the lessons that young collectors or old collectors can learn is that when you look at the pricing structure of the 33 Gaudi set with 240 cards and 60 Hall of Famers, let's say something like that, you can easily see that there's a pecking order within the Hall of Famers of some pretty minor Hall of Famers that people have voted with their dollars that they're above a common, but not that much.
Right.
And in fact, some of the guys that are quote unquote commons are well known, like Mo Burr, not in the Hall of Fame, but worth more than most of the Hall of Famers, or many of the Hall of Famers.
Well, that's no different than today. One of the most worn out phrases I see is that why is this player's cards not worth more? This Hall of Famer, and it's you can't.
Buy them up. Just
Yeah, buy
buy 'em up.
if you, yeah.
That won't be so, but you'll be holding a whole bunch of them, and who are you going to sell them to?
Yeah, I mean, the '70s are infamous for run-of-the-mill interest in Hall of Famers, like Blylevens and other than Schmidt's rookie card and all those guys, Yount, Brett, Molitor, Rice. It goes on and on and on. They're just, it just there's mediocre interest in them, and everybody's not a Mickey Mantle. You're gonna just because you're in the Hall of Fame doesn't mean you're gonna have stratospherical prices attached to your, and that goes back to the '30s as well, right? So
73 O-Pee-Chee Schmidt. Back in the day, I just think that wasn't esteemed. It wasn't really thought, hey, this is his Canadian rookie card. There wasn't a thing. It was just a high number,
right,
a high number of a multiplayer card, and it was a good card. But if you gave people a choice to have the Topps card or the O-Pee-Chee card, even though the O-Pee-Chee is way, way tougher, 9 out of 10 people would have. They might have taken the O-Pee-Chee if they
had
already
the
had
tops, yeah,
but they wouldn't say, "Hey, I got the O-Pee-Chee rookie."
right,
It wasn't even in the vernacular.
yeah. Well, times have changed now, right? Because people are already trying. People their constant thought process is to outsmart everybody else. So it's kind of opposite, which is why base cards are not a thing anymore. Um,
Yeah,
Anybody can get a base card,
and
right?
it could flip. It
Yeah.
could flip. I mean, I don't know that it's going to flip. There's always been, even back in the early '70s when I got involved, there always was some appreciation that you weren't going to trade one for one Mickey Mantle for a utility infielder.
Or even a Nolan Ryan, because nobody cared about Nolan
Or
Ryan back
even
then.
Nolan
Yeah.
Ryan, who was a 500 pitcher that struck out a lot of guys.
Mm.
But then he struck out even more and more and more and more, and more, especially the 7 no hitters.
Yeah. Yep.
But still barely above 500. But you paid to see him play. But so I'm just saying, there's always been a price structure. But if you look at the very first price guide in '79, the difference between the highest card, it's like executive salaries now. Executive salaries are all bent out of shape. The
Yeah.
highest guy in the company makes so many times more than the lowest paid person. And it wasn't like that in the '70s,
Right.
in the corporate world or in the card world. And those were simpler days. But what I did, John, again, and I'm saying this to anybody, is that in the '70s, I just thought I didn't think necessarily everything was undervalued, and I'm going to buy all this stuff. I just thought, you know, I'm going to keep these better cards. I mean, I'd rather have them than if a Mantle goes for 5 of some other guy. I'd rather have the Mantle than the 5 other guys. And then if it was Mantle's worth 10 or now 100 or 1,000, I'd still rather have the Mantle or Clemente for sure.
Hmm.
So
You still feel that way? I mean,
that's how the price moves. That's how
right.
the price moves.
I'd rather, I've wrestled in my head, and it isn't even a fair match that if I had a PSA 2 Mickey Mantle, I'd flip that thing so fast and get dozens and dozens of cards in return. Then,
More than dozens, but yeah.
well, I'm talking about when I say dozens, I'm talking about Clemente, a Clemente rookie and a Jackie rookie and stuff like that. You can get,
Yeah.
you know, I'd rather have a dozen bangers than one incredible Mickey Mantle. And that's why I like to buy bulk too. I mean, I could spend $500 on a card, or I can spend $500 on 30,000 cards
I
and
mean,
find.
I never had a want list in the 70s that wasn't cards from the 50s. So I never looked to fill in sets of 70s. I just bought the set.
Yeah, right.
They'd be $5 or $10 or something like that. And
Where would you, uh, Galasso, would you get them there, or would you just got them at shows? It didn't matter because I know
I
Renato
did
Galasso
some
put
mail
them together, right?
some mail order. Yeah, I
Yeah,
bought from them. I actually bought from them at shows as well. And she was just a name. She
right.
wasn't really the person that was,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
her
Her husband was
her
the
husband,
big player, right?
and I got some great deals from them, some fabulous deals from them
Hmm.
because they were just bulk. And
Right,
so I was thinking ahead of what might be more valuable at some point. Again, in the 70s, I had no my hands weren't tied. I
right,
was a capitalist.
right.
In the 80s, I thought, I'm going to voluntarily restrict, not going to buy and sell of stuff that I'm putting prices on because that's just doesn't seem right. But in the 70s, no such thing. I thought that looks like a good deal. I'm going to buy it, and I'd buy multiples of something.
Right.
So I got some fabulous deals from Renato Galasso. In fact, they were so good. I don't even want to. I'd better not even say.
Where did they get their cards from? I mean, today it seems so easy, right? I
Tops,
mean,
not necessarily backdoor, but they had
vending boxes or
boxes. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, it's an interesting little discussed part of the hobby, that whole earlier
Well,
70s
I'll
thing
give
with
you
the
one. I'll give you one tidbit. And I can't remember when this was. This was in the 70s, but there was a show. In fact, it was a Shea Stadium show, so maybe that would date when it was. I was there, had a table, and I was buying and selling. And I didn't. There was so much great stuff that came in, and people were buying that, and I bought some of that. But Renato Galasso had a table, and they had 63 tops sets. Oh wait, they weren't complete sets. They were just high number sets.
okay.
So they had broken a high number cut case or something like
Okay,
that. And so
right.
complete sets of all the high numbers, $50, which
A lot
they
of
were
money.
making money. They were making
Yeah.
money. And I said, I'll take them.
How many was that?
I didn't say.
You're not saying
Market, but it was
okay.
enough that
That's
that was one of my better deals.
statute of
On
limitations
the other
doesn't
hand, I
apply.
should have kept them until now, and
Well, yeah.
because I moved on and traded for other stuff. So
That's an
it just
interesting thing.
wasn't perceived again in '78 or whatever that they were 15-year-old cards. You thought, well, I'll
Right.
get some more of them, but these were untouched.
I heard an interview with Mike Arenstein where he said he liquidated his entire collection in 1984, right? And he probably thought he was the bee's knees. And imagine what that collection would be like now,
Yeah.
right? It's there's nobody that beats that beats this hobby. I think this hobby will nobody outsmarts it.
The way you outsmart it is counter instinctual. You outsmart it by dying
Outlasting
with
it.
all your cards.
Yeah, outlasting it. Yeah.
That's not. And then
Yeah.
again, the last laugh is for your heirs, I guess. But
Yeah.
even then, it's difficult to sell a large collection,
Yeah.
and it's more fun to. I think again, my message to people is because I'm trying to sell 1% a month, and I'm now kind of doing that.
I still think you're failing at that, but go ahead.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
The last few months I
Been
am.
saying that for years though, this
No,
plan
no,
going
no,
back.
no. But it kicked in. It kicked in. So I'm actually technically
Okay.
really am doing 1%.
All right.
But if you don't do that, there is some joy in selling stuff that you don't want. I mean, in order to be able to, be able to find the stuff I do want, I need to sell some of the stuff I don't want.
Yeah.
And then occasionally you'll say, I wish I hadn't sold that.
I said very recently as recently as last night on somebody's live stream that I hope it takes my family as long to sell my cards as it did for me to collect them. It'll be their problem and my last thumb in their eyes for, and hopefully they get a good chuckle out of it for a very long time.
I, I, it's not going to end well. I mean, we know how it
And I know how it ends for me. I don't. It's not my concern how it
ends.
ends for them.
Yeah, I mean, I just have too many cards, and
Yeah.
it'd be hard. It's like I said, if you had 10,000 cards, but that was 20 sets, you have 20 things.
Right.
But if you had 10,000 loose cards, which I have more than that, all of which are interesting and different priced, and some are more valuable, some are less valuable, that's a problem for somebody that really, unless they don't care.
Right.
If they don't care,
Yeah, we know the value is more of a concern for our heirs than it is for us because that's not why we started this whole thing. It's fun to have expensive cards, but that's not why we started down this path. Is
yeah.
to have
The joke is, and I don't. Again, I hope I'm going to be around a long time. But if somebody were to knock on the door of my fabulous wife the day after I die, or the week or the month after I die, and say, um, "Your husband was a great friend of mine. I know you don't remember me, but I want to buy his collection." And you know that he was always talking about doing the dollar boxes.
right.
And so, sight unseen, I just like to pay you $1 a card because a dollar in, a dollar out.
Yeah, right. Right.
That would be horrible.
Or even $2 a card. Here, I'll give you a
Just saying.
hundred
Say, well, now if he paid $1, we'll give
yeah.
him a buck and a quarter a card,
Yeah.
a buck and a quarter.
Yeah.
But the reason I bought the dollar box cards is not because they were $1.
Right. Right.
Anyway,
Well, yeah, that'll happen way down the road, so don't worry
I
about
hope,
that.
I hope,
Diane's got nothing to worry about. So
I hope not.
yeah. Well, glad to see that you finally have a little bit of
1%,
momentum, going.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm
You're only on episode 900 and something, and you're finally implementing that.
Well, the thing is, when you publicly declare you're going to do something, there's
A little bit
some
of
level of
pressure.
accountability. Nobody
Yeah.
can really twist my arm, but my eBay sales have kicked in to
Right.
a higher level in the last few months. I mean, you need to get critical mass and build up your feedback and
Yep.
reputation. Now I get some repeat business, and people say,
Yeah.
"Hey, that's cool." So I'm getting cards out of my hands. I'm selling the 1%. I'm trying to get it to people that are not going to flip me. I don't want to make it so cheap they flip me,
Right.
but that they appreciate what it is I'm selling, just
Right.
like I would have.
You don't want to plug your store. I know that. I know you're very private with that, so we won't do that. Or your
Oh, man,
ComC
it doesn't matter.
store.
I mean, I'm doing fine.
Yeah, you're doing
Would I
fine.
sell more? I would sell more if I was more public about my eBay handle, but
Right.
selling more would come with it take twice as long.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so I just think the what I sell needs to stand on its own,
Yep.
and I want to get it into the hands of people that really appreciate it. I'm doing a better and better job of that, John, and it's cool. A lot of them,
That's awesome.
they're not they're 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s.
Yeah, that's
It's
awesome.
anything, but I do need to get more 70s stuff on my wall, I think, and be more.
Yeah,
A
I mean
lot of
it's
people care about that.
and there's 70s weren't just about baseball, but I think everything changed in the 70s, but the biggest highest value cards aren't baseball cards from the 70s.
Right,
They're the Gretzky and the Peyton and
right.
the Alcindors and all stuff
Yeah,
like that. So
yeah.
fun times. Anything else? I know you said
No,
you threatened to disappoint me earlier on, and I guess that didn't happen, right?
I don't have one set. I don't
Yeah.
have one set, but like I said, I have a great affection for the 70s,
Good.
and the cards of the 70s is less of it than what was going on in the 70s. But if there hadn't been cards in the 70s, I mean, if people stop, if Top stopped, or if there weren't all these other ancillary producers to make the hobby dynamic and rich and vibrant, would I be as interested if it was just only about the older cards? I mean,
Right.
that's you need the new blood. And the 70s were there were tons of sets that came out.
Yeah, and it sowed the seed for how this hobby would grow and grow in the 80s and then obviously explode in the 90s and so
Right.
on. So good times were had. I'm glad everybody survived. Thanks for coming along for this. I appreciate it.
For asking.
Yeah, your first, you're like me. Your first thing is what could I possibly add to any of this nonsense? But I appreciate you giving me your time and thoughts and stuff like that, because many of us were way too young to remember stuff in detail from the 70s, and it's good to talk with people that were there actually doing it instead of reading about it like the rest of us. So
Or forgetting.
we're forgetting. Well, that's okay. That's okay too.
So
Yeah. So I'm gonna read my wrap up. Then I'll unlive us and then we'll chat afterwards if that's okay.
okay.
So thank you, Dr. Jim, for joining me on my journey back in time. If you have a comment or suggestion, drop me a line at that70scard show at gmail.com. That's 70s Card Show on YouTube or 70s Card on Twitter. Music on the podcast is by Mango Safari. As always, enjoy collecting and more importantly, enjoy your collection. Thanks, y'all.